come with us as we take a wee virtual trip around Ireland and give you some tips on places you might like to visit and places you should definitely not miss if you're lucky enough to go to this beautiful wee country. Welcome to
Aprender inglés con Razy Craig.
Oh, you nailed it, Craig. Brilliant accent from Craig. Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with nearly 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. So, that was a slightly different introduction than what we normally give. I really exaggerated my accent there. You might be thinking, oh, Reza sounds even more unusual than normal today. That's because I really exaggerated my Belfast accent.
And it sounded lovely. I really like the music in the Irish accent, so thanks for doing that. Now we're in the mood to talk about Ireland.
Craig, you said the Irish accent. One of the Irish accents. Because, like most places in the world, there's more than one accent. So I introduced that with an accent which comes naturally to me, which is a Belfast accent. But people from Dublin have a different accent. People from other parts of Ireland, like Cork and Kerry, have different accents as well. It's not just the one accent.
Right, of course. But why are we talking about Ireland? Well, first we have an email from Josep from Barcelona. Shall I read this one, Reza?
Go ahead.
Josep writes, Hi Reza and Craig. I started listening to your podcast in the summer, and I'm enjoying it because it's easy to understand and you're so funny. Thank you, Josep. A couple of days ago, I became a Patreon to help you and to do my bit. In Spanish, poner mi granito de arena, which is the Spanish expression for to do your bit. I don't know if this is correct. Yes, it is correct, Josep. Well done on that expression. To do my bit means to help and do something for the cause. Finally, I wanted to ask you for a new topic for your podcast. It's about Ireland. Me and my partner are going to Ireland next year, I hope in February, if coronavirus allows us. The aim is to take our English to the next level. We are B1, B2 students now. We want to live abroad and work in another country. We've finished our degree now, and it's the perfect moment in our lives to do this. So I know that Reza is from Northern Ireland. I think you could do a podcast and talk about Ireland, places we should go, maybe a little bit of Irish slang, customs, etc. What do you think, Reza? Good idea?
Yep, that's nae bother, as some people say in Belfast and Scotland. No problem at all.
Fantastic. But before we get into Josep's topic, I want to go back to March and answer a voice message we received from our friend Alberto from Australia. And we apologise, Alberto, that it's taking us so long to answer your questions about St. Patrick's Day, but maybe this episode on Ireland or about Ireland is the best place to do it. So here's Alberto's message.
Hi Reza and Craig, this is Alberto from Australia. Today I have a few questions especially to Reza, but Craig, please feel free to answer as well. I realized St. Patrick's Day was celebrated yesterday and I was wondering if you guys did something special. If so, what do you do? How Irish people celebrate the day? What meal could be the most traditional to celebrate this festive day? And when did the Irish people start to celebrate the day as something special? I have been in Ireland a few times, but never during St. Patrick's Day. I would love to be there one year. As always, take care. Thanks for your wonderful podcast and see you soon.
Well, you've probably guessed, Alberto, that St. Patrick's Day wasn't yesterday, But we can answer your questions anyway. What did you do, or what do you usually do on St. Patrick's Day here in Spain?
Here in Valencia, there's a good chance that I go and do something related to Fallas because St. Patrick's Day is the 17th of March.
Right.
And Fallas is coming to a climax then. The 19th is the big day. So there's lots of Fallas things to do if I'm in Valencia.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame in a way because here where Reza and I live, St. Patrick's Day kind of loses its effect. It's buried inside the Festival of Fallas, which is a crazy, mad, loud, boisterous festival in March here, and St. Patrick's Day falls in the middle. If it falls on a date, that means it's on that date, so it falls on the 17th of March.
Having said that, there are plenty of pubs and bars in Valencia and all over Spain where they do put up posters and decorations and things to do with Ireland to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And Craig, don't take any offence, but I've noticed they certainly don't for St. George's Day or even for St. David's or St. Andrew's Day,
No.
the patron saints of England, Scotland and Wales. Why is that?
I don't know. That's a good question. But I do know that here in Valencia, those bars that you mentioned, the Irish bars, of which there are maybe 4 or 5, they are very busy. They're very popular. People do go out here. They do celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And your second question, Alberto, how do Irish people celebrate the day? They drink, they get drunk and have parties and dress up in green.
Yes, not everybody gets drunk, but certainly nobody would be surprised if you overdid it a bit and had a few more pints of Guinness or a few more whiskies than you perhaps should have. That is perfectly acceptable for St. Patrick's Day.
I do know that in the United States of America, the traditional food on St. Patrick's Day is corned beef and cabbage. Do you have a traditional meal in Ireland?
There is no traditional meal in Ireland for St. Patrick's Day, not that I know of. Nowhere in Ireland. The only really traditional thing to consume is Guinness.
Yep.
And perhaps whiskey, but above all, Guinness. But in fact, in America, if anything, Alberto, I would say that Irish Americans and even non-Irish Americans celebrate St. Patrick's Day even more than in Ireland.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, the first Irish celebration of St. Patrick's Day, as we know the celebrations today, started in the USA. Boston had its first St. Patrick's Day parade in the streets back in 1737, a long time ago. And then New York followed Boston in 1762. So the Americans, the North Americans, traditionally celebrate St. Patrick's Day a lot more than it was celebrated in Ireland. Although having said that, I think St. Patrick's Day is one of the festivals that's most celebrated worldwide in many different countries.
Yes, you can't really think of many patron saints. That's the saint of a country. So St. Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland. You can't really think of many patron saints who get celebrated in other countries. Most countries don't care about the patron saints of other countries. Patrick is the one big exception. So Alberto, what have I done in St. Patrick's Day in my time? Well, probably similar to Craig and lots of people who are not Irish, had a few drinks with some friends. But when I was younger, I often used to spend part of St. Patrick's Day in a place called Downpatrick. Downpatrick is a small town in County Down in Ireland, in Northern Ireland to be specific, and it is said that St. Patrick is buried there, but we can't be sure. That's why it's called Downpatrick. And I often used to play the violin there on St. Patrick's Day because I was in a youth chamber group, a little orchestra, and they used to have a special mass, a special religious service in Downpatrick Cathedral, which is right next door to where St. Patrick's body is supposed to be. And they would usually have that mass in Irish to make it more Irish, in Irish language. And me, along with a few other friends, we would provide the music. I would play the violin and people would sing along. And I would say that on a good year, there might have been about, maybe a couple of thousand people there.
Wow, and you played in front of that big crowd.
No. Not everybody could fit in the church, but afterwards they'd have a kind of procession and go to the area where they think St. Patrick's body might be, but we can't be sure because he died a very long time ago. But think about it, at most 2,000 people, maybe 1,000. How many people are on the streets of New York? Compare that to the place where St. Patrick is supposed to be buried. And there's no more than a couple of thousand people. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe it's the rain that kept them away in March. I hope that's answered your questions, Alberto. And again, apologies for being 9 or 10 months late in getting back to you. But we are early for the celebrations of St. Patrick's Day this March 2022. Let's move on to the main focus of this week's episode, and that's Ireland. But before we do, there's something I'd like to clarify for listeners that are confused. You mentioned Ireland, and when you say Ireland, you're referring to the whole of Ireland? Are you referring to the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland? Because that might be confusing for some listeners.
It is confusing, and it always will be confusing, or certainly for the foreseeable future. It depends how you want to interpret it, because these days the island of Ireland can be considered as two different political elements. There's the Republic of Ireland and there's Northern Ireland. So the Republic of Ireland is a republic. So clearly it's not part of the United Kingdom, because it isn't a kingdom, is it? It's a republic. Whereas Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. But all this is very, very, very modern if you consider the whole history of Ireland.
So when was Ireland divided into Northern Ireland and a republic?
In 1921. So from when we're recording this podcast, only about 100 years ago. They divided it into the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Well, in fact, it wasn't even the Republic of Ireland. First, they called it the Irish Free State, and only much later did it become a republic. And this was because there were calls for independence. And sadly, something you do need to know about Ireland, if you visit, you should be aware of. Yes, we've had problems in Ireland. There still are some problems in Ireland. Some people blame it on religion or use religion as an excuse. In the Republic of Ireland, the population is almost exclusively Catholic. Whereas in Northern Ireland, the British part, it's about 50-50 Catholic Protestant, but there are slightly more Protestants. That is why Northern Ireland was created, to keep it in the United Kingdom. Although that angered a lot of people, it made other people very happy to remain in the United Kingdom. So let's not get into the history, but Northern Ireland is part of the UK and the Republic of Ireland isn't, although that could change, but only since 1921. Before that, it was just Ireland.
And one more question I've got about that. So when you said before that we were talking about the Irish language, that's something I tend to associate more with the Republic of Ireland than Northern Ireland. But when you grew up in Northern Ireland, did you hear the Irish language? Did you learn it at school? Was it something in your life that you heard a lot?
No, virtually never. And I didn't learn it at school. It wasn't even an option to learn it at school.
Because Northern Ireland's part of the UK.
And it depended also what type of school you went to.
That's religion then.
You see, so the religious Catholic schools and also non-religious but Catholic schools tended to offer Irish as a language. But it usually wasn't obligatory, but they offered it. Whereas in non-Catholic schools, it usually wasn't offered.
So I'm right when I say it's more common to hear and see the Irish language in the Republic of Ireland than in Northern Ireland.
Yes, but not much more either. You're not going to hear anybody speak Irish in the capital of Ireland, Dublin. You're not going to hear it. Where you're going to hear Irish language spoken is rural Ireland. Above all, the extreme north, northwest, and the west and southwest coast, and very rural areas. And above all, it's going to be older people. Although there has been a renewal in interest recently, so it has become popular again with younger people. But with younger people, it's never going to be their first language, although there are a few who go to Irish language schools these days, but they will always speak English with more fluency because you have no choice if you want to survive in Ireland. But I believe it is obligatory to study it in the Republic of Ireland. It always has been, but it's one of those things that because it was obligatory and it didn't seem to have much practical use for many decades, people didn't really pay it much attention. So it got a little bit neglected. It was relegated to a kind of academic rather than a practical subject.
Right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as far as where Ireland is in the world for people listening in other countries they may not know, what about the geography?
Well, it's an island. We call it Ireland or the Emerald Isle.
Yeah, I've heard that before, the Emerald Isle.
So Isle is ISLE, which is a more poetic way of saying island, the Emerald Isle. It's also known as Aran, by the way, or Éire, which is spelled E with an accent, IRE, which is the old Irish language way of saying Ireland. And it's also accepted in English. If you check in an English dictionary, you will find the word Éire. It's accepted as an English word, one of the ways of saying Ireland.
And is it called the Emerald Isle because it's so green, lovely grass everywhere?
That's exactly it. It's not called the Emerald Isle for nothing. It is very, very green because it rains all the time. Why does it rain all the time? Because of its geography. It's on the western fringe of the north of Europe.
What does fringe mean?
The fringe is the very extreme. So you've got, let's call it continental Europe. And then you've got the English Channel, which separates that from Britain. But then you've got to go across another sea, the Irish Sea, to get to Ireland. It's even further away. So it's right on the fringe, the edge of the northern part of Western Europe. So it's an island, and there's England next door. If you go across the Irish Sea, that's not too far away to the east. But if you travel west, there's nothing except the Atlantic until you get to Canada. That's why it rains so much. The rain tends to come in from the Atlantic, although sometimes it does come from the east or even the north. If you go north, there's nothing until you get to the North Pole. And if you go south, there's also quite a lot of sea until you come to the north coast of Spain. Probably round about Galicia is where you would end up if you go south.
So with all this open sea around Ireland, the Atlantic, right up to the North Pole, that's probably one reason why it's so windy and cold and has such a beautiful coastline there.
Yeah, that's one reason why. It's probably why the Romans called Ireland Hibernia. Hibernia means wintry country, country of winter. Okay, there are colder places than Ireland, Alaska, Canada, but the Romans didn't get that far, did they? So they got as far as Ireland, and they thought, oh, wow, we don't like this. It's like a land which is permanently in winter, cold, wet, windy, and they actually called it the land of winter.
And I know Scotland, for example, has some high mountains. It has Ben Nevis, for example. Are there many mountains in Ireland?
No, it's not very mountainous. That means with a lot of mountains. But it is very hilly. It has a lot of hills. There isn't much flat ground in Ireland. There are hills everywhere. But unlike Spain, for example, not many of them are very high. So Spain has a lot of high mountains, but not that many hills. Ireland's the reverse. It doesn't have many mountains, but it has a hell of a lot of hills.
So with so many hills, how do people make their living? I'd imagine that there isn't much agriculture in Ireland.
Oh, there is.
Where do they plant the crops?
Well, you've just got to get used to planting the crops and working with them on hilly ground. There's no choice.
Is that why sheep often have two legs longer than the other two? Because they're balancing on the hills?
Who knows? It might well be. You mentioned sheep. Exactly. Ireland is a good place for hill farming, and sheep are known to do well on hills. Also, cows don't mind hills. Perfectly all right to have cows in hilly ground. So agriculture is really important for Ireland, as well as tourism. And these days, computer software and hardware development. Did you know about that, Craig?
I did, because I have a cousin who is working in Dublin, and he's working for a tech company. And I don't get to speak to him often, but I do know that he is working for a very successful tech company in Dublin. And of course, there are a lot of large, very well-known tech companies like Facebook, Dell, Apple, Microsoft, and Google who have bases in Ireland, mainly for tax reasons, because they don't pay as much tax if they're running a business from there.
Yeah, all those companies use Ireland as their most important base in all of Europe. Not Britain, Ireland. And I imagine it's because of two things. The tax, as Craig said, corporate tax is lower in Ireland. And two, people speak English. So it's like England with lower tax. Craig mentioned Irish language earlier. Just to give you an example of how different it is to English, don't think you're going to guess it because you can speak English. I can't guess it. The word for Dublin, the capital of Ireland, in Irish is, now let me think because my Irish pronunciation isn't so good, Dublin is pronounced Boilata Cliff.
That's a bit of a mouthful.
It doesn't sound very much like Dublin, does it?
It looks incredibly difficult to pronounce when you read Irish, and I know that just from people's names, the way people spell names and the way they say their name. There's often even less of a connection between the spelling and the pronunciation than there is in English.
Yeah, because in Irish language there are lots of silent letters. You put a letter before a word and it makes it like a preposition or something like that. So lots of tricky grammar in Irish. Unfortunately, I can't really speak Irish. I only know a few words. And I can tell you that my hometown, Belfast, in Irish is Belfast. So it's nothing to do with fast speed and a bell. No connection at all. It means the ford on the sandbank. That's what Belfast means.
So let's move on to things you can see and do in Ireland. Now, there's one very famous place that you can go to, and I'm going to need Reza's help here with the geography. The Blarney Stone, Blarney, is in County Cork. Now, is Cork in the north, south, east, west?
Cork is away down in the south. I think it's the southernmost. Southernmost means the most southerly. It's the southernmost county in Ireland.
So if you're down in that area, the Blarney Stone is worth visiting. According to the old Irish legend, kissing this stone gives the kisser the gift of the gab. Now that expression, the gift of the gab is G-A-B, means that you're a very easy speaker. It comes very easy to you to speak in English. And maybe you're very humorous, you're very entertaining, you're very witty. If you have the gift of the gab, you're very comfortable speaking. So you must kiss that stone, but be very aware of the coronavirus pandemic if you do that. Make sure you disinfect the stone before you kiss it. And you can find this famous stone at Blarney Castle, which is about 5 miles. What's that, Reza? 8 kilometres?
Yeah,
more or less.
8
kilometres outside Cork City. And the stone was put onto the tower at the castle in 1446. So it's a very old stone. And this is a good time to mention, if you are touring Ireland, rent a car. It's such a beautiful country and it's not easy to get around from place to place without a car. I don't think public transport is very efficient when you leave the city. So make sure you're hiring a car to fully enjoy the Irish countryside and go and visit the Blarney Stone.
If you fancy walking though, if you're quite active and you want to do a bit of hiking, you could go to Carrangtool, which is in County Kerry. Now, Carrangtool is the highest peak in Ireland, and the scenery in the area is breathtaking. When I say it's the highest peak, by the way, it's about 1,038 meters, which isn't that high by European standards, but it's the highest Ireland has to offer. But above all, it's the view that you'll get at the top, which is amazing.
Or maybe you prefer drinking instead of walking, so if you're more of a drinker than a hiker, why not go to the Guinness Storehouse, which is in Dublin, in County Dublin, of course. And I'm sure you know that Guinness is one of the most famous beer brands worldwide, and undoubtedly Ireland's most famous export. Although there are some people, and I think Reza would agree with me on this, that Guinness doesn't necessarily taste as good when you export it. So make sure you try a Guinness, or 2 or 3 or 4 when you're in Ireland. And to find out more information, go to the Guinness Storehouse, where you can learn to pour the perfect pint of Guinness, and you can taste a few while you're there. It's the most visited tourist destination every year.
Now, Craig, you would imagine that nobody drinks as much Guinness as the Irish, right?
I know that they're big drinkers. They do like a pint of Guinness, that's for sure.
But there are people who drink more Guinness than the Irish.
Really?
Yep.
The English?
First of all, yep, the English. If you consider total consumption, the United Kingdom is a big Guinness drinker. It would be number 1, but that shouldn't surprise us because there are more British people than Irish people. But you might be surprised that number 2 is Nigeria. They drink a hell of a lot of Guinness in Nigeria. It's by far the most popular beer in Nigeria. That surprises me, though.
Well, I think we've spoken about this before, and if I remember, more Guinness is made in Nigeria than in Ireland, so I think it has a lot to do with the factories, the Guinness factories that are based in Nigeria.
Yeah, but you wouldn't expect it because Nigeria, I imagine, is warm a lot of the time. I don't know about you, Craig, but I don't feel like a Guinness when it's very warm. For me, when it's really warm, I would take a lighter beer.
Yeah, like a lager.
There you go. In Nigeria, they love a Guinness. Also in Jamaica, very, very popular in Jamaica. A lot of Jamaicans like a pint of Guinness as well.
Staying in Dublin, let's stay in Dublin for a while, because if your hangover the next morning from your Guinness is not too bad, you could take a day trip and go to, am I pronouncing this correctly, Glendalough? Glendalough. We had Loch a couple of episodes ago.
It's
Loch.
coming back.
Yes, the lake. Loch is lake in Irish. So Glendalough in County Wicklow. And you can go to the Wicklow Mountains. Now, the lake of Glendalough is one of Ireland's most beautiful lakes. The area is home to monasteries that date back to the 6th century. Have you been there?
I have been to Glendalough.
Is it nice?
I highly recommend it. It's very, very beautiful. And the old monasteries and churches there, they're very small, but they're quite well preserved. 1,500 years old. They're amazing. Well worth a visit.
And where is Wicklow in relation to Dublin?
I think it's the county just due south of Dublin, so it's not that far from Dublin. It's also known as the Garden of Ireland, County Wicklow.
Is there anything else people can do while they're in Dublin?
You could go and have a look at the Book of Kells in Trinity College, the university in Dublin. Have you heard of that?
It rings a bell, but I can't remember why.
Well, it's an ancient and very nicely preserved manuscript, so written by hand, and it was created around 800 AD, so it's over 1,000 years old, by monks, because really in Europe, monks were the only people who wrote in those days. And it's now held in a very nice room called the Long Room Library in Trinity College. It's worth it just to see the room. But while you're there, you might as well see this ancient document, which is definitely the oldest in Ireland and one of the oldest in the world, which is being well preserved. And it's very, very beautiful. It's amazing that it was all done by hand, and the colors are still pretty vivid even today.
Well, that's something I must put on my list next time I go back to Ireland. I have been to Ireland once, and I did do some touring in a car, and one of the places I really liked was County Donegal. Now, Donegal, if I remember, is northwest Ireland?
Yes.
On the coast. And one of the areas I visited was, and correct me if I mispronounce this, Slieve League Cliffs. Is that correct?
That's right.
Slieve League Cliffs. Remember, you can see all of these places in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/399. Now, these cliffs are some of the highest sea cliffs in Europe, 609 meters high, and a beautiful, quiet place with some of the most beautiful coastline that I've ever seen. So if you are in that area, Donegal is particularly gorgeous because there aren't many people there. It's very remote, it's very pretty, and I remember enjoying driving around and seeing the scenery. Amazing place.
By the way, I should point out that the word sleeve is nothing to do with the arm on your shirt, which could be a sleeve, S-L-E-E-V-E. This sleeve is spelled S-L-I-E-V-E because it's the Irish word for a mountain or a mount.
Now, there are things to do in Belfast, but we won't spend too much time on that because we've spoken about that already. If you go to inglespodcast.com/281, you'll hear us speaking about the Titanic Museum in Belfast, the Giant's Causeway that's not too far from Belfast. So if you want more information, go over and listen to episode 281, where we focus specifically on Belfast.
Going a bit further south, you could go to County Kerry. There's a couple of things you could see there. You could go to Dingle. So Dingle is on Ireland's southwest Atlantic coast. So the west, north and south is Atlantic, right? The east is the Irish Sea. And you'll find if you go there, a beautiful area of sandy beaches, jagged. Jagged means like lots of sharp angles. Yeah, jagged. G-A-G-G-E-D, jagged cliffs, and beautiful green hills. Dingle, the Dingle Peninsula. It's one of the most beautiful parts in Ireland and well worth a visit.
I mentioned hiring a car when you're in Ireland. If you do, don't miss the Ring of Kerry in County Kerry. That's Kerry. You want to drive the 179-kilometre road, which takes you through seaside villages, and you get a fantastic view of the rugged coastline. Rugged, R-U-G-G-E-D, means rocky, definitely not smooth, but very, very interesting and worth seeing if you've got a car.
Craig mentioned Slieve League in Donegal. I haven't been there, but I have been to a very spectacular cliff, the Cliffs of Moher, which is on the west coast in County Clare. Very spectacular. And they're Ireland's most visited natural attraction. So the Guinness Storehouse is the number one if you take everything into consideration, but it's not natural. When it comes to nature, the Cliffs of Moher are number one. They're 214 metres at their highest point above sea level, and they extend for 8 kilometres. That's a lot of cliffs. Right along the Atlantic coast of County Clare in the west of the country. You can see really far if you're lucky enough to get one of those good days when it doesn't rain. You can see the Aran Islands, a group of islands where people speak Irish as a first language, by the way. Not many places left.
That's where they make the beautiful knitted jumpers and wool sweaters, isn't it?
That's exactly it. You may have heard
Aran
of
wool.
Aran wool from special sheep which are on that island. You can see it from the cliffs. You can also see Galway Bay, which is very beautiful. Galway is one of Ireland's more important towns or small cities on the west coast.
So those are some suggestions of things that you should not miss if you're touring Ireland and you go over there on holiday. When you visit Ireland, there are some things you should expect. Some customs of people who live there. For example, don't be surprised if you're offered lots of tea. That's very, very Irish. They actually drink more tea per head of population than the English. So it's very, very common if you're invited to someone's house to immediately be offered a cup of tea.
A thing which the Irish share in common with the English and all the British people is that they tend to buy rounds in a pub. So if you're in a group of people, instead of buying a drink just for yourself, it's normally expected that you buy one for everybody. Now you might think, oh, that's going to cost a lot of money. I don't like the sound of that. But don't worry, because then everyone in the group will buy you one in return. So that's the normal way of doing it, buying a round in a pub.
I often got confused when I was in the UK and somebody said to me, "You're round, Craig," because it wasn't they wanted me to buy a drink. It was because they thought I was overweight.
Oh, very good, very good.
When you're in Ireland, expect to be asked a lot of questions. And this is something I discovered when I was there. The Irish are very, very friendly. Now, some people might say nosy. Nosy is too inquisitive. But I don't think so. I found the Irish incredibly easy to talk to. They do ask a lot of questions. And for me, as somebody who grew up in very cold, distant London, where people don't normally talk to you in the street or when you go into a shop or a bar, in Ireland, people are very, very friendly. So expect to be asked questions, expect to speak English. It's a fantastic place to go if you want to practice your English because people are very friendly and open and they love talking to you.
If you do go out and about to meet people and go out with your friends, if you go to restaurants, people do tip. That means give extra money if they think the service is good, but they don't tend to tip in bars. So I don't know what it's like in your country, but in Ireland, we don't really leave any money for the barman or woman, unfortunately. But in a restaurant, yes, if you like the service.
Before you go, practice your weather vocabulary. There's a phrasal verb to brush up, which means to practice and get fresh. So brush up your vocabulary for talking about the weather. The Irish like to make conversation about the weather. And of course, go prepared for some rain. Take a good rainproof jacket, take an umbrella, because chances are it will rain. When I toured Ireland years ago, it was in August. And in the whole month of August, it did not rain for 3 days only.
3 days? Wow.
3 days of rain-free we had in the middle of the summer. So be prepared for some rain, especially light rain when you go to Ireland.
The last thing I would say is expect to have good crack. I don't mean C-R-A-C-K. Hopefully nothing's going to break and crack on you.
No crack cocaine?
No. Not that I know of. I'm sure it's possible, but I wouldn't know about that.
Maybe some streets in Dublin, but who knows?
There certainly have been problems with that type of crack in Dublin.
With all those tech companies there?
There have been problems for sure. But the crack I'm talking about is spelled C-R-A-I-C. It's an Irish word, but a lot of non-Irish people now know this word. It simply means fun or entertainment. So people will quite often say, "Hey, shall we have a bit of crack?" And they're not offering drugs to you, they're suggesting that you have a good time. Or sometimes people say, "What's the crack?" And it just means, "Hey, ¿qué pasa?" It's Spanish. ¿Qué pasa? What's going on here?
What's happening?
What's happening, brother? That type of thing.
Now, when we do these focus episodes on countries, we do tend to mention famous people from the country we're speaking about, and there have been many from Ireland. When you think of the population being comparatively small, Ireland has an incredible number of famous people from all walks of life. That's all areas of life. Do you want to mention some of the more famous ones, Reza?
I'm going to mention just a couple of the famous ones first. So writers, James Joyce, Oscar Wilde, W.B. Yeats, and then one that maybe isn't so famous to you, but he should be, Bram Stoker.
Dracula.
Dracula is an Irish invention. Now, it sounds a bit odd, but it is. An Irish writer invented the fictional character of Dracula.
In the music world, U2 famously come from Ireland. Van Morrison, Thin Lizzy, a band I loved when I was younger and still do. Sinead O'Connor, Enya, The Cause, Snow Patrol, Rory Gallagher, Daniel O'Donnell, I don't know who that is.
Country and Western singer.
Is he? Oh, that's why I don't like country and Western, you see.
He's very big in Ireland,
Is
country
he?
and Western. Oh, yeah.
Gary Moore, great guitarist. Bob Geldof, from the Boomtown Rats, the Pogues, one of my favourite bands, Stiff Little Fingers, one of your favourites, I think.
Have you heard of them?
I have.
Okay.
Westlife, The Divine Comedy, many, many more musicians.
I could mention a lot of actors and actresses as well, but what I'm going to do is just mention the ones that, listener, you probably didn't know were Irish, but they are. So I'm not going to mention the obvious ones, but did you know Kenneth Branagh is Irish? Yes, that famous Shakespearean actor was born in Belfast. Did you know that Colin Farrell is Irish? Did you know Pierce Brosnan, former James Bond, is Irish? Did you know that Michael Fassbender, doesn't sound very Irish, but Michael Fassbender was brought up in Ireland and he is Irish? Just to name a few famous Irish actors.
And Liam Neeson, of course, as well, very famous actor. Well, now it's your turn to practice your English. We would love to hear from you. Why don't you send us a voice message? You can do that by going to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. You can leave your message of no longer than 90 seconds, and we would love to hear from you and know what you sound like. Or you could send us an email with a comment or question. Your email should go to me, Craig, CRAIG, @inglespodcast.com, or to Reza at belfastreza, REZA, @gmail.com.
If you're interested in further material to improve your English, you might be interested in going to store, that's store.mansioningles.net, where you'll see a wide range of products that can help you take your English to the next level.
And before we go out the door today, we'd like to thank all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon. You can join our Patreon program for as little as only $1.20 per month, and that 20 cents is for VAT, value added tax. You get instant access to recent transcriptions of this podcast. Go to Patreon, patreon.com/Ingles podcast for more information.
We don't have time to name all of the sponsors, but we do like to name the most recent supporters who've joined us. They are Erasmo Melo, Gabriela Mendez, Jorge Prado de la Cruz, and Jaime Gallego. A big thank you to all of you for supporting the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Craig, what have we got lined up on next week's podcast?
Well, next week's episode is not just an ordinary episode, it's our 400th episode. So we're going to celebrate the podcast next week, episode 400, and we'd like to hear from you. We'll be speaking about the past of the podcast, how we started and everything that's happened up to now, where we are today with the podcast, and we would like your suggestions and comments on where you would like the podcast to go in the future. So we'll practice some verb tenses next week, past, present and future, and please send us your feedback on what you'd like to hear us talk about in future episodes, and if you'd like to change anything about the way we do the podcast. So until next time, thank you so much for being with us this week. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Twits. The track is called See You Later.